Hi, welcome to Rules Challenge. My name's Carter Maxwell, and in this episode we're going to be taking a look at the game Dune, War for Arrakis. Now, before we get going on the challenge, there are a couple things that are unusual in the video that I just want to alert you to in advance. One is that I will, you'll see when I'm moving on the supremacy track or on the oppressions track that there's some pieces out there. I just like to put things on the tracks as reminders that those are triggered and enter play. So you'll see some Bene Gesserit tokens out there. You'll see Fade Rautha sitting on the supremacy track and some of the Atreides minis. So I would recommend that you do it that way too, but it's mainly just for my own personal use as reminders that those things interplay as the tokens move up the tracks. Another thing I want to point out is it was a little hard, I think, to explain what was going on in some of the battles just by saying, oh, there's a shield here, there's a sword here. Anytime that we had more hits than there are more swords and shields than there were dice to show them. So I've added a couple pieces, just cubes and discs, to represent some of those extra shields and swords. So when I'm resolving a battle, if you see a cube, that's representing a sword. If you see a disc, that's representing a shield. And also, I've got some little asterisk reminders that I use when it's a surprise attack and I know there's going to be an extra star allotted to the attacker. Another thing is, now I didn't make use of it in this video, but I would encourage you to come up with a system for remembering that when there's a leader in the regeneration tank and you spend a die, that leader should be advanced. I forget it all the time. People I play with forget it. I watch people online forget it. So I haven't figured out a perfect system yet, but I think that maybe, whenever you spend a die, it should pass through the regeneration tank on the way to the used action dice area or something, just so you always remember to check if there should be a leader advanced in the tank. Now, for those of you who are new to the show, this is basically just a test of your understanding of the rules, but instead of asking you questions just from the rule book, it'll look like you're watching a real game being played, but after each turn, I just stop and ask legal or illegal, and your job is to decide if what you saw in that preceding turn had been done correctly or not. And then, I just pause a couple seconds, then I go on and answer the question and give some explanation. As usual with my videos, we're starting with the game already well underway. I think we're either at the start of the third round or the fourth round, but we're skipping over the phase at the start where the players are rolling their dice and the Harkonnen are placing their vehicles. We'll start things out at the beginning of the action turns phase with the Atreides turn, and then we'll play through that entire phase, and you'll see the Desert Hazards phase, and then we'll skip spice harvesting and the end of the round. With that, I think we're ready to start. The Atreides want to start things off with a desert power action, but they have to first make sure that they do have fewer dice than the Harkonnen. So they've got 3, 4, 5. The Harkonnen have 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, so they're good there. And they're going to take the action, move 2 sandworms. First, they'll take this one and move it 2 spaces through the bite of the cliff siege to this desert space. And this one, they'll move 2 spaces, 1, 2, into the space with the harvester and remove it from the map. And that ends Atreides' turn. The Atreides player should not have ended the worm's movement in that space with a harvester. The only thing that can be in a space where a worm ends its movement is an environmental testing station. Now be sure to note though that I'm talking specifically about where the worm ends its movement. A worm can move through any type of piece on the map. The miniatures, a siege, environmental testing station, a harvester. So one of the things that might have looked illegal this turn but was actually fine was that the worm had started in this desert space, passed through this one that had a leader, 2 units, and a siege, and then ended in an empty desert space. Because it only passed through a space that had these pieces, that was okay. Now the Harkonnen are up, and they're going to use a strategy die. And they'll do the action that allows them to move 2 different legions. The first legion they move will be this one here. They want to move it 2 spaces, so they'll remove this ornithopter that's connected to their sector. And they'll leave behind this regular and move these other pieces to Rimwall West. The other legion they move will be this one here. They don't want to go over their stacking limits, so they're just going to move 3 pieces. 1, 2, 3. 1 space into Rimwall West. They'll move that spent strategy die into the used action dice area. And now we'll check if they have any leaders in the regeneration tank to advance. There's nobody there. And right now, neither Atreides or Harkonnen have anyone in their regeneration tanks. So I'm not going to bother talking about that every turn until we actually do have some leaders in those tanks. The way the Harkonnen did a troop transport on this turn sometimes trips people up. If a Harkonnen legion is moving or attacking with troop transport, it does not have to end its movement in the sector where the ornithopter is. It has to begin its movement in the ornithopter sector. So here we saw that there was a legion in this sector connected to this ornithopter. We removed that ornithopter, and then that legion moved into sectors into a sector that wasn't connected to that ornithopter. But that's okay, because they started the movement in a sector with that ornithopter. Now the Atreides are up again, and they're going to use a die. They're going to spend this strategy die, and they want to use Stilgar's special ability, and he is in the game. His mini's right here. And his special action says move 3 different legions. And we'll flip that card and move it off the dashboard. For the first move, they'll move this legion here into this mountain area that contains an environmental testing station, so they'll reveal that. And looks like they'll move up 1 on the Sand Dwellers token. They'll discard that ETS token, and then they'll move up their Sand Dwellers marker, and that will bring Reverend Mother Jessica into play. Lady Jessica is currently on the board, so the Atreides player will replace that with the new one, Reverend Mother Jessica. They'll remove Lady Jessica's leader card and replace it with the Reverend Mother Jessica leader card. Then they'll move this legion, which is a leader and deployment token, 1 space. And finally, they'll move this legion 1 space to join their friends in Bite of the Cliff. They'll move the spent die up into the used dice area, and that'll end the turn. A question that often comes up is, can you use a leader's special ability even if they aren't on the board? And the answer is yes. So even though Stilgar's figure is just sitting here waiting to be deployed out onto the board, he's in play and he's not in the regeneration tank, so it was legal to use his special ability this turn. Another thing that might be worth mentioning, I think sometimes people are a little unsure when moving around the Atreides legions, whether it's okay to just leave them as deployment tokens, and that is fine. You don't have to convert these into units to be moving them around the board. Now it's Harkonnen's turn, and they will spend a Mentat die. They'll use Gaius's special action, which says draw 2 Carino ally planning cards, then play 1 planning card. They'll flip the leader card and move it off the dashboard. Then they'll draw 2 gray cards and add those to their hand. And now they get to play a card. They'll play the card Explosive Artillery, which starts out saying move any legion. They want to move this legion using troop transport, So they'll remove this ornithopter that's in the same sector. Then they'll move it one over the barrier and then one more space. The rest of the card says, then make the following special attack against an enemy legion of your choice that is adjacent to one of your legions. Roll 4 combat dice and score 1 hit for each sword and star result. So they'll choose this adjacent legion here. We'll reveal the deployment token and replace that with 2 regulars. We'll roll 4 combat dice. That yields 3 hits, 1 from the star, 2 from the swords. So we'll remove both these units and the leader. The Harkonnen will choose to advance into that space and then discard the planning card. They'll move the spent die into the used dice area, and that'll end their turn. The Harkonnen player was not allowed to advance this legion after resolving the explosive artillery card. You roll the dice, apply the hits, and that's it. This is an attack, but it's not a battle. So even though the Atreides figures were totally eliminated, the Harkonnen Legion was not allowed to advance. Now the Atreides are up. They're going to spend a die. They'll use this leadership die. And they'll make a surprise attack with a legion with a leader. They're going to have this legion sand-dried using this worm to attack this Harkonnen Legion here. And this is a surprise attack, so I'm going to put my little surprise attack reminder out here. We'll figure out how many dice they're rolling. The Atreides player has 4 units there, so we'll get 4 dice. Harkonnen will get 2. Now they need to decide if they're going to play any planning cards. Starting with the attacker, Atreides will pass, and the Harkonnen will pass. So it'll be 4 dice to 2. We'll go ahead and roll the attacker's dice. We've got 2 swords and 2 shields. And the defender's dice. 1 sword, 1 shield. So we have the attacker's dice, the defender's dice, and then the Atreides will assign this star from their surprise attack to a naive leader, which becomes a sword. And we've got a shield and a sword negating each other. Shield and a sword negating. And that leaves the Atreides with 2 hits on the Harkonnen. And there are no special elites in the battle, so we don't have to account for them negating any shields. The Harkonnen player needs to apply those 2 hits. So they'll apply them both to this elite here, removing it from the board. The Atreides player will choose to continue the battle, and the Harkonnen player will choose to retreat. So now the Atreides need to retreat that unit, and they'll move them here. Now, rather than advance into the area where the battle occurred, the Atreides Legion will just choose to stay in place. They'll move their spent die into the used action dice area. Now, as a free action, they want to claim one of these prescience cards. This one says, an Atreides Legion attacks a Harkonnen Legion, not in a settlement, causing at least 1 hit. And the Atreides player just did that, so they'll go ahead and claim this one, and that will advance them 1 on the green and 1 on the red token. So they'll move up 1 there and 1 there. We'll hang on to that prescience card so we can remind the Harkonnen player later that we lopped off their head, and that'll end the Atreides player's turn. A battle like this can raise questions about where the attacker was supposed to end up. Now, it used to be that a victorious attacker had to advance into the area they attacked, but due to an official rules change, that's now optional. The Legion can advance or they can stay where they are. And that can sometimes strike people as strange if the attack is going across multiple areas. But even if the Atreides Legion had sand-ridden across several desert areas, still the choice would be either to advance into the space where the battle occurred or just stay where they were at the start of the attack. Another thing I want to highlight is that it was correct that this Legion did not suffer a hit when it chose to continue the battle into a second round. That penalty only applies when you continue an attack against an area with a settlement. This was just a desert area without a settlement, so they did not have to take that penalty. Now the Harkonnen player is up, and they're going to spend a die to play a planning card. And they'll play the card Full Control of the Air. That card says, place 2 ornithopters on the board, then move a legion of your choice. They'll place an ornithopter here, and then they'll move this legion into Gara Kulan. That area contains a siege, so the Harkonnen player will reveal that, and that is a level 2. So they'll discard that and advance 2 spaces on the supremacy track from 1 to 3. They'll discard the planning card, move their die to the used dice area, and that ends their turn. Harkonnen's mistake was in destroying a settlement merely by moving into it. To destroy a settlement, it must be attacked by a legion. Now, if it's undefended, then you would simply advance into the area without having to roll dice. But you are advancing from an attack action, not a move action. Now we're back around to the Atreides. They want to do a desert power action, so we'll check the dice counts. They're at 1, 2, 3. Harkonnen are at 1, 2, 3, 4, so they're still good. And they want to do the action attack with 1 sandworm. They'll use this worm to attack this legion 2 spaces away. They'll roll 4 dice. They got 2 swords and 2 shields, which gives them 2 hits. The Harkonnen have a couple elites in here, so they'll replace those 2 with 2 regulars, and that'll end their turn. The Atreides player made a mistake that's super common. I've done it more than once. I've seen it done in playthrough videos. When they do a worm attack on a legion or a harvester, when the attack's done, that worm has to come off the board. So after the Harkonnen had resolved those 2 hits, this worm should have been removed. Now the Harkonnen are up, and they're going to spend a strategy die. And they'll do the action move 2 different legions. First, they want to move this legion using troop transport. So they'll remove this ornithopter and move this legion 2 spaces, 1, 2, up to here. For the second move, they want to move the legion at the North Pole using troop transport. So they'll remove this ornithopter. Then they'll move that legion 2 spaces to here and leave behind the Baron to hopefully take advantage of his shields in defense of that space if necessary. The Harkonnen player will move their spent die to the used dice area, and that'll end their turn. Remember that if a leader is ever left by themselves in an area, they are removed from the board. And if they're a named leader, they would go into the regeneration tank. I find that people usually remember this after a battle or when they're moving around in the desert, but sometimes forget that this applies even if the leader is sitting in their own settlement. The Atreides are up, and they're going to use their Mentat die. They'll use the Reverend Mother Jessica's special action, which says draw 2 planning cards, then play 1 planning card. They'll go with 2 Fremen ally cards. They'll add those to their hand, and then they'll play a planning card. This one says, take a desert power action, then play 1 planning card. They're going to place 2 worm sign tokens. They'll place 1 here, and then 1 here with this Harkonnen Legion. And since there is a Harkonnen Legion there, they'll go ahead and reveal this one right away. And they got a little bit lucky and got a worm. There don't happen to be any worms available off board right now, so they're going to relocate this one. They'll replace the worm token with the worm and put that back in the bag. And now the Atreides player needs to retreat the Harkonnen Legion. So they'll move them up here to that adjacent desert space. Now they'll play another planning card. This one says, place 2 Fedaykin units and 1 Naib leader in a siege of your choice. That's a pretty nice card. So they'll put the 2 Fedaykin in here and the Naib leader. They'll discard those 2 planning cards. They'll move their die to the spent dice area, and that ends their turn. There are a couple things worth talking about from this turn. Let's start with what the Atreides did wrong. People's first reaction might be, well, you can't place worm sign token in an area with a Harkonnen Legion. But actually you can. The mistake wasn't in placing it there. The mistake was in resolving it right away. If a Harkonnen Legion enters an area with a worm sign token, the token's resolved. But if the token is placed into an area where the Legion already is present, then it isn't immediately resolved. In practice, I haven't found placing worm sign in a space with a Harkonnen Legion very useful. For one, if they're still in that space during the Desert Hazards phase, a worm sign token would be placed there anyway. And a worm sign token in a space with a Harkonnen Legion doesn't do you any good for sand riding because you can't sand ride through an area with an enemy Legion. I also want to point out that the Atreides could not have retreated the Harkonnen Legion into this space with the worm sign token. Technically, that space is free for the Harkonnen, which means no enemy settlement, no enemy units, no sandworm. But the rules specify that for Harkonnen Legions, they can't be retreated into worm sign spaces. That is not the case for an Atreides Legion. So if the Harkonnen player were retreating an Atreides Legion, they could move them into a worm sign space. Now the Harkonnen are up, and they're going to spend their house die so they can play a planning card. And they'll play the card Polar Cap Factories. The first part of that card says, place 2 regular units, 1 elite unit, and 1 Bashar leader in the North Pole settlement. So we've got a regular, elite, and Bashar leader. The next part of the card says, then discard all worm signs in areas adjacent to the North Pole settlement. There's just the one, so they'll take that out of there. They'll discard the planning card. They'll move their die to the used dice area. And that ends their turn. That turn was pretty straightforward, not much to comment on. I guess I would just say, do remember to spend your dice when you're using planning cards. Sometimes people tend to just associate those with the actions here and forget that they also need to be spent if you're playing your planning cards. Now the Atreides are up, and they're going to spend this house die as a leadership die, and they're going to take the action, make a surprise attack with a legion with a leader. The Atreides will attack with this legion here, sand riding via this sandworm to this area and attack this legion. They'll flip the deployment token and replace it with 2 elites. Looks like the first round of battle will be 6 dice versus 6 dice. So now they can decide if they're going to play planning cards. Atreides will pass, Harkonnen will pass. And I'll put my little marker out here to remind me that it's a surprise attack. And I'm going to put our Fedaykin out here and Sardaukar so I don't forget to use their special abilities. Oops. We'll roll our dice. Looks like we have 1 star, 2 swords, and 3 shields. Looks like we have 3 shields and 3 swords. All right, let's see if we can sort this out. The Atreides rolled a star, and they had a star already for that surprise attack, so they need to allocate those. One they'll allocate to Chani. She turns stars into 1 sword and 1 shield, so I'll mark those. And then the other one will allocate to this Naib leader who turns stars into a single sword. So I'll mark that with this die. Then they also rolled 2 swords and 3 shields. On the Harkonnen side, they did not roll a star, which is a shame for them. It wastes the beast's ability. They rolled 3 swords and 3 shields. Now let's apply the special elites. These 2 Fedaykin eliminate 2 shields, and this Sardaukar eliminates 1 shield on the Atreides side. Now we'll have a sword and a shield negate each other. And these 3 shields and these 3 swords negate each other. That leaves the Atreides with 3 hits that the Harkonnen need to apply. They'll replace the Sardaukar with a regular for 1 hit. For the second hit, they'll replace this elite with a regular. And for the third hit, they'll replace this elite with a regular. The Atreides will decide to continue the battle, and they won't take a hit for that since this is not a settlement. The Harkonnen player will decide to retreat, and I think they're going to regret that because the Atreides player is going to retreat them into the North Pole, and that's going to cause a stacking problem. So there are 6 units in this legion. There are 3 units in this legion. So the Harkonnen player is going to have to remove 3. So it'll be 1, 2, 3 regulars. Now the Atreides player has to decide if they're going to advance or stay in place, and they will go ahead and advance into that battle area. Now that the battle's wrapped up, the Atreides player will move their used die up to the used dice area, and that'll end their turn. People might question whether it was legal for the Atreides player to retreat the Harkonnen Legion into that overstack situation, but that was legal, and a bit of an oversight by the Harkonnen player to overlook that possibility. Keep in mind that the rules for retreating a Harkonnen Legion are that the area must either be empty, or if it's not empty, it must be free for the Harkonnen Legion and empty of worm sign. An area with a Harkonnen Legion already there is free for the Harkonnen, so this was a legal retreat. Alright, the Harkonnen are up, and they're a little tired of getting pushed around by these pesky Atreides, so they are going to also do a surprise attack. They'll spend this leadership die and use the action make a surprise attack with a legion with a leader. They're going to attack back against that legion that just attacked them a moment ago, and hope that that star result from the surprise attack makes things go better for them this time. It'll be 6 dice versus 6 dice again. We'll put a marker out here to remind about the surprise attack, and I'll put the special elites out here as a reminder of their ability. The Harkonnen will pass on playing a planning card. The Atreides will pass, so we'll go ahead and roll the dice. All right, well, not many swords. All right, so we have 2 stars, 1 sword, and 3 shields. Looks like 2 shields and 4 swords. So to sort this out, Harkonnen have 3 stars, a sword, and 3 shields. Atreides have 4 swords and 2 shields. This first star, the Harkonnen will allot to the beast and turn that into 2 swords. And the second one they'll allot to the Baron, and that becomes 2 shields. And the third one they'll allot to the Bashar leader, and that just becomes a regular sword. Now we'll apply the Fedaykin's ability and remove 2 shields. And then we'll start negating here. We've got 3 swords negated by 3 shields, and 2 shields negated by 2 swords, which leaves us with 2 hits on the Atreides and 1 hit on the Harkonnen. Now the attacker needs to remove their casualties. There was just 1 hit on the Harkonnen, so they'll remove this Bashar leader. Now the Atreides need to take 2 hits. They'll apply 1 to this elite and replace it with a regular. And then the second one they'll apply to this naive leader and remove it. Now the Harkonnen need to decide if they're continuing the battle, and they will. That won't cost them a hit. And the Atreides will decide not to retreat. It's going to be 6 units against 6 units again, so 6 dice versus 6 dice. Players need to decide if they're playing planning cards, and both sides will pass. I'll put the Fedaykin units out here again as a reminder. And we'll roll the dice. Oh, and that's a pretty strong roll for the Harkonnen. That's 2 stars and 4 swords. We have 1 star, 3 swords, and 2 shields. All right, so we've got the 4 Harkonnen swords, and then 1 of the stars they'll apply to the beast, which will become 2 swords. So we'll switch this one to a sword and add a sword. And then the other star will be allocated to the Baron, which becomes 2 shields. So we'll turn that into a shield and add a shield. Then for the Atreides dice, we have 2 shields and 3 swords. And then a star, which will be allocated to Chani, which turns into a shield and a sword. Now we'll apply the Fedaykin, which will remove 2 Harkonnen's shields. And then we'll just start doing some negating. 2 shields, negating 2 swords. Shield, negating a sword. So it looks like we end up with 4 swords on the Atreides side and 3 on the Harkonnen side. The Harkonnen need to take 4 hits. So they'll apply the first one to the beast here because they're hoping he'll be replaced soon anyway. And they'll put the beast in the regeneration tank. The second and third hits, removing this elite. And the fourth one, they'll remove a regular. Now the Atreides need to take the hits on them, a total of 3. And they're going to do something a little unusual here. These Fedaykin are hard to replace, and they do have some reinforcements nearby, so they're going to take all 3 hits on these 3 regulars. All right, now the Harkonnen need to decide if they're going to continue the battle, and they will, somewhat surprisingly, but they're pretty sure they can play more planning cards in the battle than the Atreides would be willing to play. And the Atreides agree with that. They will accept a retreat here. Mainly because a retreat probably isn't too bad for them. And the Harkonnen don't want to retreat them toward their own settlements, so they'll just push them back into this desert space. Now the Harkonnen could advance into this space, but they definitely don't want to do that. They'll just stay in their settlement. They'll move their spent die into the used dice area. They'll advance Beast Raban in the regeneration tank, and that'll end the turn. A couple things I want to mention from that turn. One's pretty basic. You might have noticed that both sides had absorbed hits during the battle by removing a leader. And people are sometimes unsure about that. They know that the leaders don't contribute dice in the battle, and they're unsure if they can absorb hits, but they can, so that was done correctly this turn. The other thing is a bit trickier, and I think it's clear in the current version of the rule book, but if you've got looking at an older version for some reason, this might cause some questions. The question is, does the special elite's ability to remove shields that are generated by a leader from a star roll? So for instance, if the Harkonnen rolled 4 dice here and it was just 3 swords and a star, that means their only shields would be coming from the Baron. And there used to be some doubt about whether or not these Fedaykin would eliminate those shields. But it was confirmed in the BGG rules forums that they do affect those shields as well. And I think that's clear in the current version of the rule book as well. I also want to point out that it was correct that Beast Raban was advanced in the regeneration tank this turn, even though he was just put in there this same turn. You get to advance figures in here on a turn where you spend a die, but you don't actually advance them until at the end of your turn you move that spent die into the used action dice area. When that occurred this turn, Beast was already in the tank, so it was correct that he got to advance. Now the Atreides are up for their final turn of the round. They'll spend their Bene Gesserit token, and they're going to use it to play a planning card. And they'll play the card Our Family Atomics. That card says, atomics immediately detonate if any marker is at step 4 or higher of the prescience track. Then play one planning card. The Atreides had just moved one of their markers up to step 5 a short while ago, so they're good there. They'll choose to have their atomics go off at Splintered Rock, so they'll place the map piece there. Now they can play another planning card, and they'll play Shai Hulud. That says, Wildmaker enters play, spent. Place its figure in an empty desert area of your choice. They'll bring the Wildmaker in from off the board and place it right on this newly created desert space at Splintered Rock. Now they'll place the Wildmaker leader card, spent, below the dashboard. They'll discard the planning cards. They'll discard that spent Bene Gesserit token, and that'll end the turn. Everything was done correctly that turn. Nothing in particular to comment on. I just wanted to make sure that everybody did have a chance to see a Family Atomics in play and to see the Wildmaker enter play as well. Now the Harkonnen will spend their final die, which is a leadership die, and they'll use that to make a surprise attack with a legion with a leader. They're going to attack with this legion here into this Atreides siege. First we'll place our little surprise attack reminder. Then we'll reveal the siege token to see what they're up against. And that is level 2. And we'll reveal the deployment token, which calls for an elite and a regular. Then I'm going to move our Sardaukar out here so I don't forget to use their special abilities. Now we'll check how many dice need to be rolled. We've got 6 Harkonnen units and 2 Atreides units plus 2 more dice from the siege token for a total of 4. Now players need to decide if they're going to discard a planning card for extra dice. The Harkonnen will pass on that. And the Atreides think this is probably a lost cause, but they're going to go ahead and discard one to try to do a little extra damage, so they'll get rid of Sand Tides. We'll roll the dice. We've got 4 swords and 2 shields. And now the Atreides. Looks like 2 stars, 2 swords, and a shield. All right, now we need to sort that out. The surprise attack star will be allocated to the Bashar leader, and that becomes a sword. Oops. One of these Atreides stars will be allocated to Reverend Mother Jessica. That'll become 2 shields. And the other one will go to waste because they don't have a second leader there. Now the Sardaukar can remove up to 2 Atreides shields. So we'll remove these 2. These 2 shields will negate these 2 swords. And this shield will negate this sword. That leaves 4 hits on the Atreides and 0 against the Harkonnen. And 4 hits will be enough to wipe out the Atreides. And we'll apply 2 to this elite, the 3rd one to the Reverend Mother, and the 4th to this regular. And they'll place the Reverend Mother Jessica in the regeneration tank. Now the Harkonnen need to decide if they're going to advance into that siege, which seems like a no-brainer, but they're in a kind of interesting situation because this is deep desert, which makes them more vulnerable in the upcoming Desert Hazards phase, and it gets them within 2 of this worm here. So instead of moving everybody in, they're just going to move 1 regular in there. And now they'll remove that siege token. They'll gain 2 on the supremacy track, and they passed over a Bene Gesserit token, so they'll turn that over to the Atreides player. We'll move that spent die to the used dice area. We'll advance Beast Raban 1 space in the regeneration tank. And that'll end the turn, and that ends the action phase. That turn was illegal because when an attacker advances after a battle, they have to advance with everybody or nobody. They can't leave some units behind. So in order to advance into that siege and destroy it, the Harkonnen player should have moved all of these pieces into that area. All right, now we're into the Desert Hazards phase. First off, we're supposed to discard any worm sign that are in areas with Atreides legions or sandworms, but we don't have any of that going on. So now we can go ahead with placing worm sign. We'll place 1 on each of these harvesters. 1 with the harvester up here, and 1 with this legion. 1 with this legion, and 1 with this legion. Now we can reveal the tokens. That one's nothing. That one's burrowing, and this is not deep desert, so that's nothing. Here we have a worm, and here another worm. Down here, that's nothing, and nothing. Now the Atreides player needs to resolve these 2 worm tokens, and they don't have any worms off the board right now, so they're going to have to be moved from other parts of the board. They'll move this worm here into the area with the harvester. As for the other one, they think they're just going to pass. They really like the positioning of their worms right now, positioned to defend some of the remaining sieges and ready to attack into a Harkonnen settlement. So they'll just discard this one. Now this new sandworm needs to be resolved. The Harkonnen player doesn't have a carry-all available to save this harvester, so it'll come off the board. The thing that was done wrong is the most complicated part, so before we get into that, let's talk about a couple more basic things. People commonly ask in what order they're supposed to reveal the worm sign tokens. That actually doesn't matter. In theory, they're revealed simultaneously, so you just flip them over in whatever order you want, and don't start resolving them until they're all revealed. Another thing I want to point out is it was correct that when this worm spawned here and caused that harvester to be removed, that it was not then removed from the board. In an earlier example, we saw a worm be left on the board after an attack, and that is incorrect. But when they spawn in a harvester area during a Desert Hazards phase, they stay there. And that's regardless of whether or not the harvester ends up being removed or is saved by a carry-all. All right, let's talk about what was done wrong now. Recall that there were 2 worm sign tokens revealed that called for worms. And the Atreides player didn't want to relocate too many worms, so he just placed 1 and simply removed the other token without placing a worm. That's illegal. If a worm would be placed from a worm sign token, it must be placed. I should note though that there is an exception to that. It's possible to end up with a situation where you would have more worms called for than there are worms in play. In this case, we have 3 burrowing worms in deep deserts, so these would all get worms, and these 3 are regular worm tokens that would get worms. In that case, the Atreides player would get to remove the excess. Here we have 1 more than we can fulfill, so Atreides could just pick 1 to remove and then place worms in the remaining areas. Now we need to resolve the Coriolis storms. We'll start with this Harkonnen Legion up here. We've got a sword and a shield, so this will be removed. Now this Legion here. That's a star and a shield. And we're in deep desert, so that star counts as 2 hits, so that unit's gone. Now this Legion. Sword and a shield is 1 hit. We'll replace this Sardaukar with a regular. And finally this Legion here in the central plateau. That star has no effect, so that'll be 1 hit. And the Harkonnen will replace that Sardaukar with a regular. I think it's worth talking about the Coriolis storm roll against this Legion in the central plateau. First off, yes, you do roll storms against Harkonnen legions in plateau areas in general. They have a reduced risk of being hit because stars don't count as hits, but otherwise they're handled the same way as desert spaces. But the roll here against this Legion was a special case. Normally you wouldn't roll for these central plateau areas because they're protected by the mountains. However, if family atomics has been used, then the plateau area adjacent to that new desert area that was created is no longer protected. Family atomics had exposed this Legion in Haga Basin, so it was correct to roll for storm damage against it. All right, I think we'll wrap things up there. As usual, if you think I got something wrong or I just have a question, don't hesitate to leave a comment. Again, I'm Carter Maxwell. This has been Rules Challenge, and I hope to see you for the next video. Thanks.